video, which is optional. On the bottom left of your screen, you can toggle that video to be on or off. I will be spotlighting, however, the speaker who is speaking at the time. We do ask that you do stay muted throughout the discussions today. And so just so that we can allow for the speakers to easily talk. I do encourage you though to please ask questions via the chat window. So if you would like to chat, in the middle of your screen down the bottom is a little chat window that brings up to the right the ability to ask questions. We have Tabitha Badger, who is our social media person supporting the restoration of Pedder, there to answer your questions and have a chat. So please do feel free to have a chat. We will, or I will ask 3 questions from the audience later in the session, but otherwise, yeah, do enjoy the presentation and discussions. I should just mention, we are recording this event, and so we will be sharing the full file afterwards. So looking forward to that. Anyway, with no further ado, I will introduce Christine Milne, who is the co-coordinator of the Lake Pedder Restoration Committee, and of course the former leader of the Greens. So Christine.
Thanks very much, Jess, and that was our terrific project officer, Jessica Robbins. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, particularly at this really difficult and anxious time of the coronavirus pandemic, and at the same time, the climate and biodiversity crises. But this is a moment for celebration of Lake Pedder and the restoration of Lake Pedder. But remember too, we're also meeting on the land of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, land that was never ceded, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Well, today is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. It's also almost 50 years since our magnificent Lake Pedder in the heart of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area was inundated by the Hydroelectric Commission at that time as the Serpentine impoundment. For 50 years, people have been campaigning for the restoration of Lake Pedder with real momentum in the 90s in the Pedder 2000 campaign. But now there is a real opportunity to achieve it. 2021 to 30 has been declared the United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. When the decade was declared, the UN said it aimed to massively scale up the restoration of degraded and destroyed ecosystems as a proven measure to fight the climate crisis, enhance food security, water supply, and biodiversity. It'll add momentum to the Bonn Challenge, which was to restore 350 million hectares of degraded ecosystems globally. That's a big ask, and Lake Pedder can be part of that. As the UN Acting Deputy Director said, the degradation of our ecosystems has had a devastating impact on people and the environment. We're excited that momentum for restoring our natural environment has been gaining pace because nature is our best bet to tackle climate change and secure the future. And I'd add pandemics to that as well. Now we're working as the Lake Pedder Restoration Group to have our efforts showcased in the work of the UN Decade and once again put Lake Pedder and its restoration in Tasmania at the forefront of ecological conservation and restoration globally. Now last year, our dedicated team of volunteers and adventurers held the inaugural and inspiring Paddle for Pedder, and here it is.
Great, thank you so much, Christine, and I will just get that video started. 1 second. To the original Lake Pedder, we've got a crew of 12 kayakers, and they are going to be raising a banner which says Restore Pedder. 3, 2, 1.
We're just doing a little bit of a dry run, getting the kayaks organised to head out. We've got a fair little paddle ahead of us today.
It was a beautiful lake, it's a unique lake, and we'd like to see it go back to the way it was.
Yeah, Lake Pedder, I think, is just significant globally. It's the start of the green movement, not just here in Tasmania and Australia, but globally. Like from here it all started.
I think if it was still here today, it would be as big, as significant, maybe bigger than the Great Barrier Reef or Uluru. It'd certainly be in that field.
The restoration of Pedder is one of the world's longest standing environmental campaigns. It's been running for almost 50 years, and we're really calling for the draining of Lake Pedder and its full restoration. We want the restoration of Lake Pedder to be the symbol of hope to the world that ecological restoration is possible and is the way of the future. Excellent, thank you. And sorry for the little bit of technical difficulty there. Hopefully it came across okay.
Yes, thank you. And I hope people enjoyed being out on the lake with the paddlers for a few minutes. And of course, that terrific reminder that it was the campaign to restore Lake Pedder that led to the formation of the United Tasmania Group, the world's first Green Party. And now we have 90 countries around the world with Green parties, and everyone acknowledges it all started from here in Tasmania. Well, one of the people who has been absolutely critical to getting the paddles for Pedder going is expedition leader Andy Solosi. He's a wilderness photographer, he's an adventurer, and he's been a key part of our campaign to date. And so I'd really like Andy to talk to us about why he loves the Tasmanian wilderness, his involvement with the restoration of Pedder, and more particularly at the end, how the two paddles for Pedder were different, what were the challenges, what does he see as the challenges in holding them in the future, and also the excitement we all feel about having discovered recently, on top of film that we had in the late 90s, but now recent film showing that the beach remains intact. That will be such good news to the supporters of the restoration of Pedder. So Andy, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Yeah, so I was actually born and raised in Budapest in Hungary, and we didn't move to Australia till I was about 14, and I've been in Tasmania for about 6 years now. And I moved down here to become a walking guide on the overland track. And in that 5 years since, I've probably spent more time in the mountains of Tasmania than I have in Hobart, where I actually live. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the wild places, and it struck me during that time that that wild character is what really makes people fall in love with Tasmania. And I couldn't help but know that in that short period of time that I've been here, there has been loss of wilderness. And listening to the old stories, looking at the old photographs, we have lost a lot of wilderness in the last couple of generations, Lake Pedder being a prime example. And I will never forget the day that I saw a photo of Lake Pedder, which you can kind of see in really bad quality behind me, which I've had pinned to my wall ever since. It was a beautiful place, and it's disappeared due to human influence. And I guess one of the things that struck me about it was that it wasn't just a lake that was flooded. The current impoundment's 25 times the size of what used to be there. So it's actually, you know, when we talk about restoration, we're talking about restoration of a huge natural area. And when we paddle out there now, something doesn't feel quite right, because the very center of that ecosystem was the Serpentine Valley that drained Lake Pedder out into the Gordon. And without that ecosystem as it used to be, now it's a bit of an eerie place being out there. So I guess that's a bit of an introduction for, you know, my kind of perspective on it. But what really got me involved was, yeah, Jess last year contacted me to see if I could help with the campaign, to raise the profile of the campaign a bit and to do something, you know, an action. Combined with Dan Brune's idea, who's a well-established conservationist in Tassie, and he came up with this brilliant idea to do a paddle on Lake Pedder and get a banner up. And so I guess I was the person who took that idea and said, okay, well, how are we going to do it? You know, the little practical, yeah, nitty gritties is my expertise, you know, of kind of bringing a group of people together, setting an objective and saying, right, we're going to go and do it. And we didn't know if it was going to be successful because this banner was huge. It was about 10 meters long, and it was quite a windy day, I remember. And the crucial element of a trip like that is to have your team and have your equipment. And so, you know, getting 6 kayaks down there, all the people turn up at the right time, make sure everyone's got the kit, make sure we've got the safety covered. And on the day, it was actually quite windy. So a 10-meter banner became quite a large sail, and it took 8 people to hoist it up, you know, with the paddle through the sleeves into the banner. And that formation went sailing faster than almost one could paddle. So we were almost surprised that we pulled it off, you know. That was the first year we did it. It was a new idea. We just thought, you know, a bunch of us who knew each other went out there yeah, got that beautiful video out of it, which I think has helped, you know, re-engage people with the cause and begin that conversation once again of, are those dams still useful? And is there a better way to perhaps utilize the Southwest, you know, and Lake Pedder? Do we really need those dams in place still? And so this year we did the paddle again, just to kind of show, I suppose, that we're not going to go away. We're not going to give up on this. We're determined, and we want more and more people to engage with the cause and, you know, slowly but surely build a campaign to really start asking those questions, you know, on a public scale, I suppose, at some point in the future, and bring it to people's awareness. And this year, actually, the weather was very kind to us. Just when we needed the wind to calm down, it did. Because the thing about being on such a big lake, the wind really sets the rules, especially when you're trying to get a 10-meter banner up in the air and a drone, you know, kind of recording it all at the same time. So we were lucky enough to pull it off again. But what was different this year was that we actually knew that we were exactly over the lake that was flooded. So the original Lake Pedder, when you go out on this, the current impoundment, it's really hard to know where it was, except before the paddle this year, I actually went out there with a team of divers, and we had a submersible with us, and we had confirmed by that point where the original beach was, and we got some footage of that as well. So when we did the paddle this year, I knew exactly where we were in relation to the beach and could deduce that we actually raised the banner directly over where the original Lake Pedder would have been. And to me, that was quite a powerful feeling, being on the lake, knowing that we were directly over the original lake. As I guess you'll soon find out from a short little video that we've put together, is that we have discovered that the beach is still intact with a very fine layer of sediment over the top. And that was from sending a little submersible down with a camera on it, and basically confirming that the sand dunes, the trees, like everything is still there. And I think that's one of the first things that people oppose to the idea of draining Lake Pedder, is that that beach would be under meters of sediment and we'd never recover it. And I think just simple visuals of it, because it's been years since divers have gone down there, we actually know, we can see it. And I think that's a really powerful idea in looking ahead, and just kind of saying what is possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. I will just shift to the film. Sorry. Apologies, sorry. I just made a bit of an error there.
Well, we came out here today on this little boat to the original site of the Lake Pedder. Here we go. Okay, so this is the edge of the dune now. So now we're starting to get back on the beach. Yeah. So the tree line pretty much runs along the line we're sitting on now. We're just trying to get a visual of Lake Pedder's original pink quartzite beach. And we've got a submersible, an ROV on this boat. All right. Okay, let's see. Oh, here we go. Oh, okay. I look pretty pebbly. And what we're seeing is a very fine and thin layer of sediment over what appears to be the quartzite beach of Lake Pedder. See those white particles there? The white grains? So those granules that we're looking at, they're actually quite small and they could be quartzite particles. I think that clearly shows there's a very thin layer of fine sediment.
There's definitely quartzite sand underneath there, isn't there?
Okay, it doesn't want to go any further than that. All right, here we go.
You know, defined beach edge is still there. The dune system is still there.
Yeah.
You know, the trees are even still there, like holding it all together, like but with their roots.
What we've already learned just from that last two dives is that the quartzite beach is still underneath less than a few millimeters of sediment.
The underlying geology seems to be fine. It seems to be the same.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And we're going back to Christine.
Thanks, Jess. And having seen that footage, people can now be assured that the beach is intact, and we're now, that gave the paddlers a tremendous inspiration when they set out for the 2020 paddle for Pedder. And so now we're going to see a little film of the 2020 paddle, and then I'll talk to some of the people involved in that. So thanks, Jess, if you can show us this 2020 paddle.
Excellent.
These folk are here.
Oops, sorry. Apologies again for that slight technical difficulty. There we go.
Here for Paddle for Pedder, part of the process of restoration, recovery, and the wonder of Pedder coming back into the world for everyone.
We're here to raise a banner that says Restore Pedder on the side of the original Lake Pedder that was flooded in 1972. There's a team of about 20 paddlers today, and the aim of the game is to basically recognise that the original Lake Pedder is still intact, and we're going to celebrate that heritage and the possibility of restoring that lake and the surrounding ecosystem that was flooded in the early 70s.
It was a magnificent lake. We used to walk in here and we thought it was so beautiful. We couldn't believe that the Hydroelectric Commission and the state government could drown a lake in a national park. And so to hear that now people are trying to rejuvenate it, get it back to what it was, is very exciting and inspiring.
This is the century of survival. This has to be the century of ecosystem restoration, and Lake Pedder is absolutely at the forefront of this globally.
It gives not only Tasmania but Australia an opportunity to be global leaders in ecological restoration in this time when our country is quite behind.
When Jess, the project manager, initially talked to me about the project and asked me to support it, I immediately brought me back to Quebec, where I'm from, and where it's the land of clean hydroelectricity, where the government and media don't talk about all the negative effects. So for me, it's a good example that we can set in Tasmania for Quebec and to start decommission dam and create more like cleaner, renewable source of energy.
I'm so looking forward to seeing these young paddlers go out there onto the lake and to make this statement to the world that here in the far reaches of the Southern Hemisphere, we're taking a stand for the future, we're taking a stand for nature, we're taking a stand to restore the heart of the Tasmanian wilderness, restoring Lake Pedder. Great. Okay, well, that was a really good indication of what a good day it was, and it was challenging, as Andy had to say, because of the wind, but nevertheless it did drop in order to get the banner up.
Brought to you by the ACA, improving the paddle sports experience for over a century.
Okay, sorry about that. So we had two groups of paddlers this year. One group who were very experienced and who did the full paddle, the 23 Ks out to the beach, but we also had a second group of paddlers who went out in support and did a shorter 9-kilometre paddle. And leading that shorter paddle was expedition leader Gordon Henry. So Gordon, can you tell us about your interest in Lake Pedder, in restoring the lake, your experience of the 2020 paddle as the expedition leader, and any of the highlights of the day for you?
Thank you, Christine. Hi, my name is Gordon Henry. I'm a dentist from Hobart. I was approached by a good friend of mine, Dick Friend, who asked me to join the paddle. And as an avid paddler, I was delighted to be able to spend a couple of days with this group in the magnificent scenery of the West Coast. I regularly paddle on the Derwent River, probably about 4 mornings a week, and as such, I was approached by Andy to assist in leading the second group on the shorter paddle. After making our way up to Scotts Peak Dam on the Saturday, setting up camp and then attending a briefing by Andy, we were treated to an outdoor feast by Lisa and Eric, and they also cooked us an amazing breakfast and supplied us with a packed lunch, which sustained us for the paddle ahead. The unpredictable weather of the West Coast provided me with quite a bit of anxiety in the morning as I pondered the task of keeping the group that I was in charge with safe and together. The winds and rain abated, and luckily we had relatively mild conditions to paddle in. We originally planned on paddling 8 kilometres to the island and back again, but due to the conditions we were able to circumnavigate the island, where we stopped off and had a lovely lunch and then returned to the car park, travelling a distance of about 12 kilometres. It was a very pleasant and uneventful paddle, and we probably travelled about 12 kilometres in all. I was ably assisted by Peter Goldthorpe. Thank you, Peter. And I thank all of the paddlers for their company on the day and their compliance, making for a wonderful experience. I'd encourage all paddlers to make the trip to the West Coast and paddle the beautiful waters that are available. I've paddled the Gordon River and various other lakes and rivers of the West, and have found it a mystical almost spiritual experience. Gliding along mirror calm waters veiled in a thin cloud of mist, with the splashing of a platypus breaking the serenity. It's such a pure experience. I would like to thank Andy for his time and effort and coordination, making this such a memorable day. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Rob, I think. Rob.
Well, I was just going to introduce Rob Blakers. Rob is a very well-known wilderness photographer. His magnificent photography is on the walls of many people's houses and his books, of course. And he has been a big supporter of the restoration of Lake Pedder throughout. One of the interesting things about Rob's work is that he has in recent years become an outstanding drone pilot to enhance his wilderness photography. And he was able to use those skills as a drone pilot in the recent Paddle for Pedder. And I think people would be really interested to know that, that not only was he there, but he was there in the most magnificent kayak with outriggers and with a sail. It was quite magnificent to see him roaring up and down the impoundment, being able to photograph the paddle. So I'd like to hand over to you, Rob, to tell us why you are so committed to the restoration of Lake Pedder, to the protection of Tasmanian wilderness, because a whole lot of your work has been dedicated to saving endangered places, and any of the highlights for you in terms of your drone photography in the restoration of Pedder and the paddle. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Christine. I want to start by a recollection of when I first came to Tassie, which is in 1975. I came down straight after school, after I finished school, with a few friends, and we went walking. The first walk was in the Western Arthurs, and the second walk was at Mount Anne. And both of those walking, destinations are proximate to Lake Pedder, or the impoundment. And I'd come straight out of school. I hadn't been here before, and no one had sat me down and talked to me particularly about the history of the lake. I knew the basic story. But notwithstanding that, we all had this very strong sense that this was an alien imposition within the landscape, that the impoundment was really a gaping wound in the natural tapestry of the land. And we, climbing up Mount Anne, for instance, you look back down the hill and you can see the impoundment, but we weren't taking pictures of it. And it just had this really strong sense of something not right, something that shouldn't be there. It's as if it was a giant construction site, full of bulldozers and earthworks and so on. That was the extent of the sense of the disturbance. And little has changed in the 45 years since then. It has, some of the edges have softened a little, but then I was just reminded so much by that picture of that Andy, you show, Andy, I think you showed from Graham Wooden or Jess, of the original lake. And that was such an incomparable gem that to see that against what there is, exists now is such a sad comparison. The restoration, to take it back to, towards something resembling the original lake, wouldn't be an easy task. There's no question of that. It would take, some things would, the beach would presumably appear fairly quickly. But what a project, what a fantastic project, going against the grain of, the existing trend of destruction across the planet, to bring back such an incredible place. And Tasmania could be the forefront, not only with the restoration of Lake Pedder, but there's also so many other projects that we could do here. We could be planting, replanting Kingbilly pines and so on the West Coast Range. We could be actively rehabilitating the old growth forests which have been logged, to again foster their regeneration. back to, you know, as quickly as possible back to what they would have been, you know, 250 years ago. Christine talked about the drone and the kayak. The kayak's a fantastic thing. I grew up sailing, and so I'm very comfortable with the sail, and this one's got outriggers so you don't tip over, and a nice big sail and you can really fly. Unlike everyone else, I was hoping for the wind to increase, and so when the squall was coming through at the end as we were coming home, I was sort of egging it on to get stronger and stronger, and yeah, it's another great way to spend time on the water. And drones, they're a double-edged sword. They're a very effective tool, but they're also like a large blowfly. They can be very annoying in the appropriate place for the appropriate task with the appropriate permits. I think they've certainly got a place because they give a perspective on landscape that we've simply never been able to have up until now. And, you know, be that flying above the water with kayakers, you know, sailing along with their sign below, or else floating through rainforest treetops in the Tarkine. It's an extraordinary tool to have that we can be using for, you know, to highlight how fantastic Tasmania is and to, you know, encourage its restoration. So all in all, thanks again to Andy, Christine, everyone else who's been beavering away on this issue for so long. And again, I'd go back to that picture of Graham's and obviously the other pictures from Malagas and Peter and Kevin, Dave Nilsson, other people who did get to see the lake and who took pictures, hold the photographs that they took against how it is now. And this, you know, that speaks the story. Thanks. Over to you, Jess. Christine.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. That's terrific, and people love an insight into what goes on behind the camera, so that's great. Another photographer and filmmaker who has dedicated hours to capturing our campaign so far, from our pub nights, from our meetings, every aspect of the campaign, has been Luga Olsen. She's an overseas student studying media at UTAS. And so I'd be really interested to know, Luga, why you got involved when you came to Tasmania in exploring the wild, why you've supported us through the restoration of Pedder and put so much time and effort into it. What does it actually mean to you as someone who's come to Tasmania in recent years?
Thanks, Christine. Well, so I wanted to help filming this campaign. Essentially, I find it like it's a very important campaign, and as Andy mentioned, people come to Tasmania and fall in love with the wilderness, and that was definitely the case for me. So I'm originally from Denmark and have settled down here in Tasmania, and besides having studied in journalism, coming here kind of changed the trajectory of my life. So now I'm also studying protected area governance and management. And in Denmark, we have a very agricultural landscape. There's not much of the type of nature that we have here. So I don't think that it gives you the same experience that you get here in Tasmania. So I really want to do my part and help protect it. And where possible, I think it's great if we can also restore it. It's such a unique and special place, and I don't want to see it being overly developed as a lot of Eurobus. And for me, it's also not just about restoring the lake and the beach because of its beauty. It's also about restoring the ecosystem because essentially we need it. In this time today with climate change, we need that type of ecosystem because peatlands are so important in sequestering carbon. And yeah, so I think it's really important that we start restoring the ecosystems that we've destroyed so far. Yeah, and I guess the filming part of it is also, I think video is a really good way of engaging with people. And in our case, it's also a really useful way to take people out onto the lake, people that couldn't come for that paddle that we did. And also having Rob and his drone and that footage just makes, it's really good footage and it draws people in. It certainly drew me in when I saw that first video. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you. We are really grateful to you. And it's just another example of how special Tasmania is. Sometimes those of us who've always lived here forget how extraordinarily special we are in a global context, and the fact that the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area is a World Heritage Site because of its outstanding universal values to humankind. And what you've just said reinforces that. So thank you for all the work that you've done and will continue to do, no doubt, in helping us in the restoration campaign. Before I hand over to Jess to go to the questions in the chat box, I just wanted to especially thank Patagonia, the Bob Brown Foundation, the State Cinema, Keep Tassie Wild and the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre for their support for the 2020 Paddle for Pedder and the restoration effort to date. We couldn't have done it without them. Patagonia has been very generous, everyone has been very generous, and of course we continue to raise money to keep on with our efforts. So over to you, Jess, to have a look at the questions in the chat box.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christine. And the first question is going to be for you. It's from Puck, and he has asked, or she, how big is an impediment is the push for pumped hydro for big battery use? Is Pedder significant in plans for this?
Well, that's a really big question, and it's one that we are keen to have answered in a serious study of energy and economics. So the hydro has always argued that it couldn't possibly do without the storage of water that is Lake Pedder that flows into Lake Gordon and feeds the Gordon Power Station. Of course, it is actually, in the scheme of things, only a small amount of, it produces only a small amount of the energy from the entire hydro system. However, in recent years, the Tasmanian Hydro has become very excited about having interconnectors to the mainland with the idea of producing more renewable energy to send over those interconnectors. We have one already with Basslink. There is a proposed second one with Project Marinus, but the hydro would like to have 5 interconnectors actually. They also want 3, to start with, 3 pumped hydro facilities in the north of the state to complement that engagement with the mainland. There are a lot of serious questions about the economic viability of that. My view is that storage is better suited to be near where it's going to be used because of transmission losses and the like. With offshore wind coming from Gippsland, with the changes in the system and new battery storage, it's very likely the hydro will miss the window of opportunity in terms of building these new pumped hydro, especially since their timetable has been pushed back because the rock is a lot harder than they thought for drilling, because they need to build new storage lakes above the 3 that they are currently proposing. So this is an interesting time. It's also an interesting time in relation to Snowy too. That's why we need an economic and energy study to look at, wouldn't it be actually better to restore Lake Pedder? The energy from Lake Pedder could be replaced with one large wind farm, by the way. But wouldn't it be better to keep the energy in Tasmania and to electrify the transport system, electrify agriculture? We could be an extraordinary example of what you can do in a place where you have more renewable energy than you need just to keep the lights on and energy security for the population. And Tasmania is also compounded. The problem is compounded here because a lot of our energy, a lot of the hydro schemes were built for energy consumers, big heavy industrial consumers. Those consumers are now falling over. The latest one in the north, Temco in the north. So that's where we are on that. So my hope is that we can raise enough money in the short term to be able to have a serious look at the energy and economics issues. But I'm confident that it is a much better option to use energy in Tasmania, restore Lake Pedder, and be the example to the world in terms of ecosystem restoration.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christine. And apologies, we did just have a little bit of a glitch on the video there, but it's come back now. The second question is from Sasha Pusel, who has asked, what is it that we can do to help the campaign whilst we're in isolation?
Well, lots really. The first thing to do is share the webinar today. We'll be putting it up on our website, and all of the links will be on the website too to the films. So send it out on your social networks so that people are aware that we're running a campaign to restore Pedder, and just get them involved. Secondly, we're going to have 2 more events, virtual events, in the next short while, as in one in a fortnight and one, I think, 2 weeks after that. They will be looking at issues of what ecosystem restoration actually looks like and means in a global context. That'll be one. And then we'll have an evening screening in a couple of weeks of the original Allegas Trahanas film slideshow that was so influential back in 1972, and that will be hosted by Bob Brown. So those things are coming up. So at this stage, raising awareness is really important. And the third thing, of course, if you can afford to donate to the campaign, we'd love that too. But at this stage, it's really building public awareness and support, and getting involved in getting that energy assessment done. We've already had a contract for an assessment of the ecosystem issues. So looking at things like erosion, looking at the viability of the plants in terms of whether or not we'll have to reseed, a whole range. All of those issues need to be looked at, and we'll be getting a report on that in about June, I think, and we'll be in a better position to answer people's questions about how long it will take for the system to come back. Of course, it's not going to be immediate. One thing, we have to manage expectations. You can't drain a mega impoundment, as Andy has been saying. That whole valley has been flooded for nearly 50 years. It'll take a while to come back. But the thing is, the fundamentals are there and they are able to come back. And that's quite exciting. In a century where there's so much degradation, it's nice to be able to be positively engaged in bringing something back. So that's a few things that people can do in the short term.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christine. We have managed to address a number of questions that were asked. One of the other questions is, how can we help get the restoration of Pedder onto the agenda of governments so how can we help get the restoration of Lake Pedder onto the agenda of governments?
Well, I think there's a really big opportunity right now because the pandemic has essentially been a global press the reset button. Everywhere people have realised that the loss of nature is contributing to these global pandemics. The fact that there's a global population which is wiping out habitat for wild animal species, and as a result there's more transmission from the wild to humans of diseases, everything from Ebola, of course, to the recent pandemic. So people are starting to think about that. They're looking at the length of supply chains, whether that's sensible. They're looking at issues around neoliberalism has collapsed, it has failed the community well-being around the world. Everybody's looking at what to do next, and huge stimulus packages are being developed because of the unemployment that has resulted. It's up to us now, as stimulus packages are being framed, to be campaigning for billions of dollars to be put into ecosystem restoration consistent with the UN Charter and mandate of the decade, because we could put a whole lot of people back to work in ecosystem restoration, not just with Pedder, but in so many other ways. We've still got tracks in Tasmania that have not been restored since the fires, and we have so many other weed projects, invasive species projects, marine projects, you name it. So I think what we need to do now is make sure that as people start, as you have the business community rushing to say they want tax cuts, the community needs to get involved in asking that nature is invested in heavily as part of the stimulus coming out of the pandemic.
Excellent. Thanks, Christine. And we are close to being able to wrap up, but I just wanted to ask, you did touch on a few things that are coming up, but yeah, what is actually happening next? What are the big priorities?
The priorities for the project, for the campaign, are to release the ecosystem assessment, the nature-based ecosystem assessment, get the energy and economics assessment done. We're already pretty well across all of the other issues. We have a lot of volunteer assistance looking at what it would take to actually pull down the dams. And in the very short term, we have these two events coming up, which Jess is just loading to the screen now. Having a discussion about ecological restoration in global recovery, and that panel will be on the 6th of May. And Todd Dudley will be part of that, talking about the ecosystem restoration projects he's been involved in with degraded forests in the northeast. He's also a co-convener of the Lake Pedder Restoration Group. As I mentioned, an evening screening of Elagis' Elagis Trahanas' original slideshow. That too is coming up on the 20th of May. So we'd love it if you joined us for that. So thank you everyone for joining us today. It is nice, I think, to have an opportunity to be distracted for a little while from the horrors of the pandemic, which tend to dominate all coverage at the moment, and take a few minutes to go out onto the impoundment and think about and be inspired by the restoration of Lake Pedder. So the webinar today will be on the website. Please have a look at it. Please share the films with anyone you can on social media, and we'd love it if you joined us in the campaign to restore Lake Pedder. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christine. And yeah, as Christine said, thank you all for coming. We will be sharing the link to the webinar via email shortly after this. So please do go to our website, donate, and we look forward to you continuing to be involved in the campaign. So thank you all very much. Hurrah, hurrah. And bye. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.